Hello and welcome to another CQPweb video tutorial, and in this tutorial I'm going to talk about the subcorpus system. And this is accessed through an entry on the main menu, namely this one here, create/edit subcorpora. So if I click on that, then this interface here will appear. Before I start talking about it, let's clarify what a subcorpus is. A subcorpus is a set of texts from within the corpus, right? So every corpus in CQPweb consists of one or more texts. It's possible for the entire corpus to be made of just one text, or the corpus might be broken up into hundreds or thousands of separate texts. Either way, well, if there's just one text in the corpus, then obviously that can't be divided up any further. But if there's more than one text, which is usually the case, then it's possible to define subcorpora. And a subcorpus, as I say, is a list of texts which define some subset of the corpus that exists. So this will probably become clearer once we talk through different ways in which you can create subcorpora, and all of that is done in this particular screen here, the create and edit subcorpora screen, which has two main areas. Firstly, there is the define new subcorpus area, which gives you a single drop down with 6 different methods for 6 different methods for creating a subcorpus, which I will show you in a minute. And you work this control by simply selecting the method that you want and pressing go. Okay, so we'll do that in a minute. We'll start working through them one at a time. First, let's take a look at the bottom half. This is the existing subcorpora list. Every time you create a subcorpus, it will appear here. Now, at the minute, there is only one subcorpus listed here, and it's actually a special subcorpus, and that's the last restrictions subcorpus. What does this mean? Well, remember that it's possible to use a restricted query to search for things in only certain subparts of the corpus. Well, when you do that, the restrictions that you've used are recorded in the subcorpus database, so that if you want, you can come back to them. However, this last restriction subcorpus is overwritten every time you do a restricted query. So let's take a look at it in this display here. The last restrictions that I used last time I was using this corpus covered 1,234 texts and 33,960,000 words, so about 34 million words across those 1,234 texts. The frequency list is something I'll talk about later. It doesn't apply to the last restriction subcorpus, but then you've got 3 options here. The add option, which allows you to add text to a subcorpus, the copy option, and the delete option. Oh, I just pressed delete, so that's cleared everything out completely. We'll come back to the other options once we've looked at how to create some subcorpora and see how those options work. So let's look at the different ways of defining a subcorpus. The first way to do it is via corpus metadata. What that means is that you specify a subcorpus. You can see that just pressing go then has caused this form to appear. You create a subcorpus by specifying certain criteria in the corpus metadata that a text has to have. And if the text has those criteria, if it matches, then it's in the subcorpus. If not, it's not. So this is the Early English Books Online corpus, version 2 of that corpus, so about 625 million words. and each text has got 3 pieces of metadata: the century that it's in, the status of its date, how certain we are about the date that has been labelled on this text, and then the decade. So basically the decade and the century both both classify different texts into time slices, but at different levels of resolution. So let's search for a corpus that contains all the texts that have the criterion of being in the 1400s. So let's call that texts 1400s. Note that the name for rules of things that you save in CQPweb apply. You can only use letters, numbers, and the underscore character, like so. Once we've clicked there, once we've entered a title, we can click Create Corpus, and now we have the subcorpus on our list. Now, things are a bit different here to when we had last restrictions, so we can talk about this in a bit more detail. First of all, we have a clickable link on the name of the subcorpus. And if we click on that, as you can see from the little blue tooltip that is there, we can view or remove text from this subcorpus. So when you click on it, it gives you a list of all the text ID codes in this particular subcorpus. And you can do a number of things here. Let's see, there we are, all 83 texts. And you can see that we've got the feature here which shows the particular thing that we classified the text by in the first place. Then we have the size in words here, which tells us how big each individual text is. And then we have the text ID codes, and we're going to come back to these, this is important. The text ID codes have links on them to the text metadata page. So if I click through on this randomly chosen text A05232, then you will see the various metadata that is stored in the database for this particular text in the corpus. Now note there are lots more bits of metadata here than we were able to choose from when creating a corpus by restrictions. So remember that we're only able to look at decade, century, and date status. Now the reason for that is that all the other fields are what we call free text fields of metadata, which means that they are not things that set up categories of text. Only these 3 create categories of text, so those are the only ones that we could choose from. There is another way, however, to access the rest of the fields, which I'll show you in a little while. So yes, and there's another one, just for the sake of argument. So you can see there's a lot of metadata here. The texts vary wildly in size. 5 million words total from texts published in the 1400s, but they vary from 200,000, there's another 200,000, there's one that's nearly 400,000, to really short ones, including 58 words. What text is 58 words? A liturgy from the Book of Common Prayer. Interesting. Oh, it's an advert by William Caxton. How interesting. This is all by the by. Anyway, what we can actually do is we can modify the subcorpus by removing texts. So, for example, let's say we take that advert was text A18294. Let's say we don't want that in the subcorpus at all. Then we can tick to have it deleted. And press this button here, delete marked text from subcorpus. Now look at this number, the last 2 numbers there are 69. Should reduce to 11. Yes, it does. So we've gone from 83 texts with 5 million and then a number ending in 69 to 82 texts with 5 million and number ending in 11 because we removed that text. We can also add texts, and if I paste in, I copied the number of that text that we took out, so if I paste it back in there, I can enter the text ID code of the text that I want to add to that subcorpus. And it doesn't have to be one that was in there before and has been deleted. I could add in any text I liked. This just happens to be a number that I know, so let's go with that. And it says here, enter the file names you wish to add to this subcorpus. Use commas or spaces to separate them. Well, I'm only adding one, so I don't need a comma or a space, so let's just press that. And we're back to 83, and we're back to 5 million, blah, 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 ending in 69. So this is how, once you've created a subcorpus, you can edit it by adding texts or by going into the list and then deleting texts. So press cancel, that takes me back to here. I'll talk about copy. We've talked about add. I will talk about copy and compile after we've looked at the other ways of defining a subcorpus. Of these 6, I am not going to show you this one, create a subcorpus for every text, simply because that would be a lot of subcorpora, because this is the EBO corpus, which has lots and lots and lots and lots of texts in it. This would only be useful if you're dealing with a corpus which contains only a few texts. Whether it's a big corpus where a big corpus with big texts or a small corpus with small texts, that's the only situation where that's useful. That option is there, but let's not look at that for now. Let's have a look instead at some of the other options, and I won't go through them in order. What I'll do is I'll start with some of the easiest ones and then go on to the more complex ones. So we've seen define new subcorpus via corpus metadata. Let's try manual entry of file names. Go. There we are. Okay, so again, whenever you create a subcorpus, you have to specify a name. So let's call this one manual because that's how it's been created. And again, enter the file names you wish to combine. It's literally what it says. You type in the text ID codes of the text you want to add. How do you know what text ID codes to use? Well, in any concordance, the text ID codes are listed next to the concordance hits. So you can always have a look at the text ID codes in this column, which appears here in a concordance. So if I open, for example, a standard query in another window, and I do a search for a word, let's say something, and it hums away because this is a very big corpus, 47,000 matches, but let's pick one or two of these numbers. So let's pick that one. What else can we pick? Let's pick this one. I'm using Control C and Control V here for copy and paste, which works in most browsers on most operating systems. So copy that. So there we go, there's 4 texts. So if I create that subcorpus, there we are. The 4 I chose happen to add up to 416,000 words. And let's go into... Okay, and they're scattered around the corpus. Again, I can click on those to see what I've got. I appear to have a history of Alexander the Great, the advert by William Caxton, and what's this? Remedies against diverse diseases, and a panoply of epistles or a looking glass for the unlearned. How interesting. So these are the texts from the early English Books Online collection that have ended up in this corpus, and again, this subcorpus rather, and again I could edit those, but I'm not going to. I'm going to cancel, return to the menu. So that's manual entry of file names. What else can we do? Well, we can invert an existing subcorpus. What does that mean? Well, invert means, as it says in the instructions, you create a new subcorpus containing all the texts in the whole corpus except those in an existing subcorpus that you have selected to invert. So let's invert my collection of texts from the 1400s, my 83 texts, and let's call it inverted 1400s. Now this is 625 million words in this corpus in total, roughly speaking, so there should be about 620 million words in the inverted version. Let's see. Yes, there we are, 619 million words, close enough. Now, I shan't dig around in the list of texts. We've seen that plenty of times. So, we've looked at invert, we've looked at manual entry, only two of these different definition methods left to look at, scan text metadata and text found in save query. Let's have a look at scan text metadata. Scan text metadata allows you to search any of the metadata fields for texts, and you can then, having done that, you can include all the texts that you find into a subcorpus. And this allows you, remember I was saying that there was a distinction between metadata fields that set up a category versus metadata fields that contain free text information. In this case you can scan through any of them, right? So that's the difference between using corpus metadata versus scanning text metadata. So, what could we do, for instance? Well, we could scan topic key terms for, I don't know, what might be a topic? Medicine? Have I spelled that right? Is it medicine or medicine? Medicine. It's one of those words I always struggle with. Now in this case we don't go directly to creating a subcorpus. Instead we use the get list of text button, which takes us to a display very similar to the display for texts inside a subcorpus, but instead of showing us a subcorpus, the contents of a subcorpus that already exists, it shows us all the texts that match the search that we just did, and we get to choose which of these texts, which include medicine as one of the topic keywords, and there's 101 of them. Then we get to choose which ones we include in the subcorpus. So I'm actually going to include all of them. And you have a choice here. You can either use the name that you specified here, or you can add them to one of your existing subcorpora. So here you've got all the subcorpora that we created before. So if I wanted to take my manual subcorpus and add to it all of the texts that have medicine as one of the topic keywords, then I could do that. But I don't really want to do that. I want to have a new subcorpus, and we'll call it medical. I want to include all texts. It would be quite possible for me to just have ticked a selection, but I want to include all texts. I press add texts, and I'm back to the display, and there's my medical subcorpus ready to work with. Okay, let's try another one. Again, using scan text metadata. What else could I scan? I could scan the author for the surname of an author that I'm interested in. Who might I be interested in? This is where my lack of knowledge of English literature of the early modern period rebounds on me and means that I can't really think of anything. Oh, I've just thought of something. I know I have a colleague at my institution, Lancaster University, who is interested in an author called Thomas Churchyard. So let's search for Churchyard in the author field. Don't ask me who Thomas Churchyard is, because I don't know, but he's apparently a very interesting chap. Anyway, here he is. We have the results. All the cases where author includes the word Churchyard, and here it is. So we can tick some or all of these. So I'll tell you what, let's just tick the ones where churchyard is named on its own, and let's not tick the ones where someone else's name is given as well. So I'm just filling in these ticks one by one. It's a bit of a pain because we've got quite a lot of text, but it illustrates the principle of how this all works. And of course this would work with any corpus that has the author of the text as a metadata field. And let's call it by TC, because this is text by TC. Add text, there we go, 463,000 words. So that illustrates scan text metadata. So the last one then is text found in a saved query. So I don't think I actually have any saved queries, so what I will do is I will save this query that I did in this screen, my query for something. Now that query found matches in 5,911 different texts out of the 12,000 odd texts in this corpus. So if I save this query using the normal interface, and let's call it Q for something, query for something. Okay, so that's saved, and indeed if we go to new query and we go to the saved queries, which I've done a separate tutorial on query saving, so I shan't explain that now, but there it is, there's my saved query. If now on the create and edit subcorpus screen I say text, define a new subcorpus via text found in a saved query, let's call it something texts. It says here, select a query from your saved queries list, and then either directly create a subcorpus consisting of all the texts that contain at least one result for that query, or view a list of texts to choose from. So I've only got that one saved query, so there it is, the query for something. And if I press this button, then just as with the metadata scan, it will give me a list of text to choose from, or I can just create a subcorpus from all the texts that have at least one hit in this saved query. So I'll do this one. And there we are. Something texts contains 5,911 texts, 491 million words, and this is exactly what it should have done. Remember, the something query had hits in 5,911 texts. All of those texts that had at least one instance of something in them are now contained here. Now, obviously for a query for something, that's not terribly interesting, but imagine instead we'd done a query for something like, I don't know, religion or science, and then created a subcorpus on the basis of that. Then we would have a subcorpus of all texts that mention science at least once, or all texts that mention religion at least once. And that obviously is a much more interesting entity than a corpus of a subcorpus of all the texts that mention the word something at least once. Okay, so those are the different methods of creating subcorpora, except for that last one, create a subcorpus for every text, which I'm not going to do for this because, as you can see, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of texts here, and we don't want a pile of that many thousand subcorpora in this display. Let's take a look at some of these other things that you have here. We've already looked at the add function, and we already know what delete does. Let's take a look at copy. What copy allows you to do is, quite literally, copy, right? Because we know that we can amend a subcorpus by adding to it or by deleting text from it. So being able to copy allows us to duplicate a subcorpus that exists. Then we'll have one that we can leave as it is and another that we can modify. So let's take manual and we'll call it duplicate. Again, you just have to enter a name and you're done. So there's duplicate and there's manual, same number of texts, same number of words. But if, for instance, I go into duplicate and I say delete those two texts, Boom. Then now duplicate has 2 texts and is much shorter, whereas manual has 4 texts and is exactly the same length as it was before. So that's the use of the copy function. And what this gives you all in all is a very efficient way of managing different slices of the corpus in terms of different groups of text. There's one less thing to talk about, which is this column, the frequency list column. Frequency lists for these sections of the subcorpus are very useful because you can use them. Well, firstly, you can browse them using the frequency lists function, and secondly, you can compare them using the keywords function, each of which I'm going to have a separate tutorial on. However, they're not created for subcorpora straight away by default. You have to actually, explicitly create them. So, what you have in this frequency list control, in this frequency list column, is a link you can press to build the frequency list for this particular subsection of the corpus. Now you will see that the two really big subcorpora, the 620 million and the 491 million word subcorpora, it says cannot compile, and the tooltip says cannot compile frequency tables for this subcorpus as it is too big. Well, yes, like it says, a frequency list that big would take a very long time to compile, and that CQPweb won't let you lock up the server for that long. But these smaller corpora, it is possible to compile frequency lists for them. Compiling a frequency list is one of the longest time-taking things that you can do on CQPweb. So let's take the very smallest one, this duplicate, and press compile and see how long it takes. There we go. Took 3 or 4 seconds to do 300,000 words. So now, instead of saying compile, it says available. And it'll continue to say available if we edit it, if we change something in it. So I don't know. Let's choose another text number. Let's choose that one. And if I copy that and I add that, so I've now changed it. Changing it, adding a text to it, has deleted its frequency list. So now if I want the frequency list, I'll have to compile them again. But otherwise, the frequency list will stay available. So that's available. Just to illustrate, I will click on the compile button for the medical corpus, which is 7 million words. And you can see it is taking quite a while. The server is grinding away. Shouldn't take too long. That's how long it takes to build the frequency lists for 7 million tokens. So you can see that this does take a while. The virtue is, as I've said, that once you've done this, the frequency lists are then available for use in the frequency lists and keywords tools up here. If you haven't compiled them, then they're not available. So what can you do with a subcorpus once you've created it? Well, you can do a number of things. Frequency lists and keywords, obviously, but we can also use them as restrictions for our queries. So remember that when we've created our subcorpus, they will appear at the bottom down here in this restriction drop-down. The restriction drop-down, the first things on it are the categories in the primary text classification scheme. So the primary text classification scheme is to classify texts according to their decade. But after we've listed all the decades, we have a list of all your personal subcorpora. So if we choose to search just within the medical texts, for example, for, I don't know, head, let's see what people say about the head in medical texts. And we'll let it hum away for a minute. There we go. And we've got your query head in subcorpus medical returned 4,000 odd matches in 84 texts, 7 million words 101 texts in total. So this is the total size of the subcorpus, not the whole corpus. We search within a subcorpus, so we get the size of the subcorpus, and this is the number of texts and the number of hits for the term head. So that's how you use a subcorpus to limit a query. You get it, you create it in the Create Edit Subcorpus tool, and then you find it in this drop down and use it that way. The frequency list and keywords interfaces are the subject of tutorials that will follow this one. But that's all for now.